now we go back, I hope. Okay, now we're rolling. So here we are at the end of the High Middle Ages. What brings the Middle Ages to a close? Well, I've listed, you got the list probably. There are about 6 things, but certainly one of them is a pandemic. This was really a pandemic. It went across all the way to China. And it entered across the Silk Road from 2 ending terminals of the Silk Road. So one terminal of the Silk Road ended in the northern Black Sea and Crimea, and that's when a ship from Genoa picked it up and brought it back. And the other came into the southern part of the Black Sea. So we're familiar with the Crimea today, just because, oh, it's that small little thing of land that Putin grabbed. Well, the Crimea is really a central point in the history that we're on to next, which is the history of Russia and the links between the Byzantine Empire and this new upstart Kiev, which was founded around 800. So it's been perking along since around 500 years by this time. And we're going to get to that once we finish killing off the Middle Ages. This was a bacterial infection transmitted by rats and fleas. But I'm using this as a segue to just pandemics in general. This is the first, there have been pandemics, we never knew for sure what they were, mentioned in history every now and then, all the way up to now, but this is the best documented one. I think this is the first documented where we've got we're pretty sure what the culprit was. I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about the history of infectious disease in humans and the interaction between humans and animals. And we're seeing that big time in bats as an amplifier for pathogens that occur in nature. And so this is another look at that, and we see that there's an interaction between livestock and wildlife, okay? And in this case of COVID, the livestock may have been a pangolin, which is a wild animal. I'll show you a picture in just a second, that's used in Chinese medicine and is sold in the wet markets. So that may have transmitted the COVID from bats into humans in the market. And we see throughout history that there's been a number of diseases where you have humans, livestock, and wildlife all coming together. And avian influenza, plague is right there, but avian influenza is a viral disease. And that's what I want to spend time on today. And fortunately, we have a specialist in virology, and I've given her an advanced preview. So maybe she didn't have time. I didn't give her enough time. So maybe off the cuff, I would appreciate any comments at the end. But viruses are a big deal. And we see shortly after the Black Plague, the Columban exchange. And it was not a good exchange for the New World. We gave them smallpox, measles, and flu, and chickenpox. Those were the big ones that killed off more Native Americans than violence and homicide did. Also gave them malaria and TB. The New World diseases, they gave the New World syphilis and polio. Syphilis is now a chronic disease, but when Europeans first got it, it was an acute disease, and it was spread on the battlefields of Europe as really an acute pandemic. Now it's just kind of indolent, and we've developed immunity to it. Again, just another take on this. I'm just going to be emphasizing now the viruses. This is a rickettsia, kind of in between a bacteria and a virus. And scarlet fever is a toxin from a bacteria. But just to vividly show you what we're talking about, smallpox was the one. Smallpox was the leading cause. And we know the stories about how unscrupulous traders and deliberately infected blankets given to Indians. That whole tragic story of our colonialism. But as we talked about last week, human beings jumped on that, and the last human case was in 1979. But for the Native Americans, that was devastating. And, you see different statistics and estimates up to 90% of the population experiencing either morbidity or mortality from the viral diseases. Devastating. I just want to go way back where Juan Jose and I started last April, back into the hunter-gatherers. And for 20,000 years, our 200,000 years, our relationship with animals was sporadic. We didn't live with the animals. We killed them one at a time and butchered them, which in terms of controlling viral disease was probably a good lifestyle. But we started a new lifestyle with the agricultural revolution around 10,000 years BCE, which is also the estimated time of the smallpox virus inflicting disease on humans. So that's interesting. We started living with animals, and we started getting diseases. How they can make that estimation, I don't know, but maybe Irene will tell us. The other thing I want to point out is Jared Diamond's theory on why, when old Europe met New Europe in the Columban exchange, we seemed to be relatively immune to the diseases that just went rampant among the Native Americans. And he makes a big deal about Europe domesticating more animals, more mammals, more large mammals. Of course, there were small birds in there too, and ducks and chickens. But mainly the large mammals is what he focused on. In the New World, there's really only one large mammal that was domesticated, and the llama. Turkeys, of course. But the other point that he makes is not only did we have a large number of mammals, but the axis on which these mammals were introduced was roughly the same climate zone, which meant that hello, Rob, which meant that these diseases could be shared along this axis. Whereas even if the Americas had a lot of large mammals, they are on this axis, which has different climates. So there's going to be different mammals that are going to thrive in different diseases for each different climate zone. Same is true for Africa. That's Jared Diamond's speculation, which I found interesting. So measles was maybe in second place. You read about these terrible measles epidemics about Native Americans. Now measles is bad and still kills a lot of people that are not immunized. The statistics on that are overwhelming. And I'm glad to go through those with you. I have a very nice YouTube that just goes through the numbers, and it's overwhelming. The downside of getting the measles vaccine compared to the upside is it's just gigantic. So where did measles come from? It evolved from a viral disease afflicting cattle, the rinderpest, and how they determined that the genetics experts, I can't tell you, but I take their word for it. And interestingly enough, the first measles epidemic first appear in the Mediterranean with urban communities, large urban communities. At least they're first recorded when people are writing down a lot of history that we get today. And there was a big plague in 180 ED, the Antonine plague, that was probably measles. So there's no free lunch. Every advance in civilization brings downsides and complications. And us living closely with our animals, sometimes sleeping with the animals, is a problem. And I've been kind of following this interesting suggestion for a while, that specifically putting ducks and pigs together on small farms. Look, if you have a duck farm that's really large, fine, as long as it's not right next to a gigantic pig farm. But where you have little farms where ducks and pigs mix together and wild birds fly in periodically, some people believe, and I'll be interested to see what Irene has to say about this, that this is just a petri dish for new viruses to emerge. And we've certainly been seeing that in the last 20 years, all the viruses that have come out of Asia, specifically southern China, around the Pearl River Delta, where you have a lot of small farmers and a lot of a very dense population. That you'll see fowl and pigs mixing together. Pigs are interesting in that their antigens are similar to humans, which is probably why they can get a virus and pass it on to humans. You'll remember in the early days of valve replacement that pig valves were used because the antigens in their cells are similar to ours, and there's less rejection. Now, I don't want to pin everything on the Pearl Delta. There's certainly a lot of diseases emerging currently all over, and I just throw this in so that we keep our perspective. But the big pandemics that we've been dealing with the last 20 years have come out of China. The other problem that we have is are human beings expanding. One of the first slides I showed to Juan Jose when we were looking at how come civilization progresses and advances is one of the characteristics of human beings is their restlessness, their adventuresome, their expanding territories, and we're expanding into wildlife areas. I just saw a coyote this morning in our backyard. I didn't tell Aiko yet, so she may gasp. And then what happens is, particularly in China, wildlife is trapped and sold in wet markets, mixing with livestock. And I said before that, and here's one of the wet markets. I think I've said earlier that Aiko and I have been in these 4 of these wet markets with Ramsey and Janet on our very adventuresome camping and 2-star hotel tour of China. And this is the pangolin, and it is used in Chinese herbal medicine. So there's a real market for them, and they may be an intermediate host between the bat and the human. And this is the last 20 years. We've seen all this stuff emerge in the form of if not pandemics, very close calls. SARS-1 was nipped in the bud. Also, interestingly enough, according to Larry Brilliant, because social media picked up a pattern on the internet of something going on around Shanghai. But that's another story. We certainly failed on this one. And here's the sobering thing. And I read this one article that said, hey, they're cataloging all the viral diseases in the world. It's a big project. Irene can tell us more about it. But the report I read is there may be up to 18,000 potential pathogenic viruses out there. And holy cow. So that means we've got to pay attention to our lifestyle, because what we've seen, what's changed, particularly in the last 20 years, is China has become a not a rich country, but certainly a middle wealth country. And they have a lot of people that can travel. And they are building really fancy new airports. And one of the problems in Wuhan was how many people flew out of Wuhan all around the world. This is a bad day. It's a day where some flights got canceled, but it makes my point, I think. And then the last question I would have for Irene is, we've heard a guy, an evolutionary biologist, talk recently, and he thinks that COVID is mutating like not like a wild virus, but he thinks he's giving some credence to what I thought was just a conspiracy theory, that maybe it did leak out of the Wuhan Institute. So I'm going to pause here for just a second. I'm going to leave this slide up because we're going to go into another part. But Irene, I'm going to put you on the screen, I hope, for you to give a comment.
Unmute myself. So the comment that I wanted to make about Brett Weinstein is, I haven't read his stuff, but one of the things, and I just posted it to you, John, one of the things that bothers me when people get all looking for a smoking gun is that they generally don't take into the fact that we don't know how much asymptomatic transmission has been going on, and they're not calculating the fact that if I get infected by 1,000 or 10,000 viruses, I am exuding billions and trillions of virus over a long period of time. I'm therefore speeding up the evolutionary trajectory of that virus powers, many logs. So of 10. So I get really nervous when these guys start yeah, trying to point a finger at something. And also, if they had known that they could tweak it in a certain way to make it go viral, I mean, pandemic, that just doesn't make biological sense. And the third point is that the mutations that we've seen, South Africa, Brazil, and a bunch of other ones, they are, I think they're happening at a rate because of the replication rate. Anyway, that's it. Bye.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I know Brett Weinstein was saying that maybe they supercharged the deliberately supercharged COVID so that they could come up with defenses against the supercharged. So that was, but I'm reassured by what I didn't want to believe him. My priors is that this is a conspiracy talk. So I'm going to be nervous along with you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Irene. So we're living in historic times, so I just have to comment on what's going on around us and why Juan Jose is wearing a mask today. And I just couldn't resist putting in the historical context. And in particular, when we come out of this, now with China as a country that is wealthy enough to fly all over the world, as Chinese tourists have been doing for the last 20 years, we as Homo sapiens have to come up with some sort of global adjustment to this new reality that there are 18,000 potentially pathogenic viruses, and that our buffer between them in the wild is decreasing. And once one of them breaks through, it doesn't just break through to a local village and burn out. It has the potential of going all the way around the world. All right. So the other thing, I just felt I had to bring that up. It's just been weighing on my mind that at the end of COVID, we got to start thinking big. And let's hope Joe Biden can do that and lead the world, because nobody else is going to. Unless maybe it's the EU, but they're struggling. They're struggling mightily with COVID. So the other thing that came out, and that's why I sent out the list that I did, and is just in the last 3 months, it's become apparent that Donald Trump is not just a huckster and a showman and a clown, that there is something else going on, and it sort of crystallized my thinking. And there have been a few, so I'm going to go on and talk about that. And I know we're putting off the Middle Ages. We'll get to the Middle Ages. I'll try to do it quick. It's a downer. I'll try to do Russia quick. And then when we come back to Europe, we will need something uplifting. So I'm promising you a guest lecturer who will kick off our discussion of the Renaissance by talking about Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, so keep your faith. Keep
Muted
your faith.
applause.
We're going through some dark topics here, and it'll get even darker when we go back to the Middle Ages. But there's going to be light. Leonardo awaits for us at the end of the tunnel. So I sent out this characteristics of fascism because there's no real good definition of what fascism is as an existing ideology. It comes in many different forms, but these are some elements that I thought we should look at, particularly because in the last 3 months, number one, powerful and continuing expressions of nationalism have given us violence. Fortunately, we don't have a controlled mass media, but Fox is certainly doubling down. They've fired one of the more reasonable people on Fox, the one that called at the decision desk, called Arizona for Biden. That's why he got fired. These new networks that are coming on that are obviously, we would say from our perch, brainwashing a good portion of the nations. I put in a different color that corporations seem to be putting up some resistance. Rampant cronyism we've seen in the last 3 months, pardons, just crazy pardons. And now we've seen a large section of our House of Representatives undermine the elections. So Laurence Britt is the name of the guy that put that list together. The other person I want to send you to is Jason Stanley. He's a professor of philosophy at Yale. He's written a book. I haven't read it, but I heard him interviewed, and Aiko did too. And we were both really disturbed by what he had to say. And the transcript of that interview is on Vox, not Fox, but Vox. Juan Jose, there's a big difference between Fox with an F, which is very ultra. I'm not going to use the word conservative. It's ultra populist. Vox is a more sane outlet, and so. If you go to Vox, you can read it, the transcript. It's quite sobering. And he doesn't come up with a list, but he points out that the fact we have to look at fascism as it's developing as a process, not once it becomes formulated in government, because by then it's too late. The other resource is this essay by Timothy Snyder, also at Yale in political science. And I recommend that. He's also a historian of fascism and Trump. So I'd recommend this article, that book. But we're going to work off of Laurence Britt's list because I thought it was the most manageable to help us think this through. And fortunately, some fellow put together and made a little slideshow. God bless the internet, that I'm going to go through and add to. So the list, you'll remember, number one is a powerful and continuing nationalism. Boy, have we seen that. We have seen flags, a actual Trump flag, along with the other flag. We've seen this a lot. And now it's changed for this election. to keep America great. A disregard for human rights, I think we've seen that in spades. The separation of immigrant children from their parents. I mean, how uh, unspeakable. The identification of enemies as a unifying cause. This obviously was much worse than what we saw. Germany's much worse, but we're seeing that here. We've lived through now 5 years of right. Well, I'm going to call them right now populists, but later on I'm going to use a different word. So this guy'd rather be a Russian than a Democrat. And so owning the libs, trolling the Democrats, humiliating your enemies is part of the fascist mentality. And it all started with this guy in 1990. He got into Congress in the 80s, but came into power. He's still around, Juan Jose. We bump into him on TV all the time. But he came up with a lexicon that we should start calling Democrats traitors and other pejorative words. I put a lot of this stuff demonizing opponents at his feet. We saw it, this attitude take off with Tea Party anger in 2010, and obviously there was some racist themes that we were very sensitive to at the time. And that Tea Party morphed into a political movement which renamed itself the Freedom Caucus. And this is Rand Paul, whose father is a libertarian. And so we thought they were libertarians. They said, we're libertarians. This is Mark Meadows. He's going to be the through line. This is Jim Jordan. What a jerk. This is Grover Norquist. No taxes at all, ever. And behind them, turbocharging them, was the Koch money, laid out very well in Dark Money by Jane Mayer. Now, this says David. This is actually Charles, but he's standing in front of a sign that has his brother's name. David lives in New York and is a philanthropist, and whatever museum you go to in New York, David's given to it and is honored. Charles still lives in
Topeka.
Huh?
David's dead.
Yeah, David's dead now, but you still see his name. Charles is still alive, as I'll make apparent in just a second. He lives in Topeka and still runs his empire. So there they are. This is the handoff. So Mark Meadows is the bridge. This is the libertarian operative, Koch brother operative, Paul Ryan, and he got his legislation through. So that was the bridge. Trump did a favor for the libertarians, got that tax cut through, but he didn't do everything that Paul Ryan wanted to do. Paul Ryan wanted to cut Medicare, wanted to cut Social Security. Trump wouldn't have any of that as a populist. But there's Mark Meadows. And here's Mark Meadows, the opportunism that once Trump came on the scene, all of a sudden they dropped their libertarianism like a stone. Trump's not a libertarian. Trump, we know, is nothing except a narcissist. And the hypocrisy and the Koch brothers picked up on that, and they started bad mouthing Trump. And Trump badmouthed the Koch brothers. They were going back and forth on Twitter, and I think the Koch brothers finally gave up. But they have not put money into Trump since Paul Ryan left. And so what we've seen, the Freedom Caucus was at most 30, and they drove the head of the Republican House representatives, John Boehner, crazy, forced them to quit. And we've seen just in the last month that they have grown from 30, which they were in Boehner's day, say 2 years ago, to 138. Those were the number of Republican representatives who rejected the election on, I want to say January 6th, but it was actually in the wee hours of January 7th at 4 in the morning, after the insurrection. They still voted to reject the election. But just yesterday, there was one bit of hope. How many of these people were doing it because they felt intimidated by Trump? We have the answer. Less than half were true believers, because yesterday there was a secret ballot regarding Liz Cheney, and only 61 took the Trump view that she should be demoted. So that's one little ray of hope. I don't want to leave you all feeling terrible, but here's Mark Meadows. He stayed on to the bit. He became the chief of staff, and he stayed on to the bitter end. Mick Mulvaney, who you saw earlier, had been chief of staff, another Freedom Party stalwart. But interestingly, Mick Mulvaney has done a mea culpa along with Charles Koch, and said he was sorry, and he doesn't, after the insurrection, he doesn't want anything to do with the so-called Freedom Caucus, which at this point, I've got to say, the Freedom Caucus is turned into a Trump cult, and a strong leader is absolutely necessary for a fascist movement. And they had their 1/3 of Congress supporting a charismatic, I'm going to say it, a proto-fascist leader who wanted to overturn an election. Charles Koch just wrote a book that came out in November, and he said, boy, did we screw up. What a mess. And this is all in a review of his book on The Economist, if anybody wants to read it. All right, so that took a long time. So now we're back to the list, and we're at number 4. The supremacy of the military. Well, fortunately, our military is not the Prussian military in Germany, but there was a certain fascination with the military. But interestingly enough, at least 3 of these guys, I think we can view now very positively. John Kelly is a toss-up, but he's off the Trump train, and this guy's still a diehard. And this guy, Mark Miley, in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he participated in that photo op that when they all walked across the street. Here's our friend Mark Meadows, to that church, and Trump held up the Bible. Mark Miley said that insofar as the military participated in that, he was sorry. So, and our military's held firm, and I think, along with corporations, are a surprising ray of hope. If you had told me back in the 60s that the day would come when corporations and the military may save the country, I don't know what I would have done. Widespread sexism. I'm sure you all have an interesting take on that, and I'm sure you've felt it. Certainly the focus on abortion in this country, and the way the evangelicals have forgotten everything else except the abortion issue, downplaying everything else, is disturbing. Controlled mass media. Fortunately, our mass media is protected by the Constitution, and it's holding firm. But they've been putting pins at rallies. They're not allowed to mingle, probably in their interest. The obsession with national security is certainly there. And we've touched on this earlier with what they've enabled themselves to do with immigration, the atrocities. But the constant linking of immigration with crime, even though statistically immigrants commit less crime than natives, has bothered me. At every state of the union, he's done this and brought people into the audience that he acknowledges, and victims. This is something that Stanley says you have to watch out for this as in the toolkit of somebody who's trying to build a fascist movement. Once you realize that it's in the government, it's too late. So process. That's what this list is about. The tools in the fascist toolkit that are creating a process that inch by inch moves us to a place where we don't want to go. Religion and government are intertwined. You had the Catholic Church in the last election, 1932, when the Nazis got 1/3 of the vote. They went into a coalition with the Christian Catholic Party, and the rest is history. In our case, it's very odd. Rick Perry says publicly, Trump is the chosen one. Give me a break. God used imperfect people all through history. Echoes of King David in Trump. Holy cow. And how can the evangelical community tolerate the rest of his behavior? Because there is this sort of irrational, ultra-romantic connection of Trump to religion. Corporate power is protected, particularly Mussolini and his movement co-opted the corporations. Certainly, Krupp Industries, the war industries in Germany supported Hitler. But as I said earlier, our corporations are cutting off politicians. And I think the important syllables here are multi. We're no longer dealing with national corporations. We're dealing with multinational corporations. And I'm sure they've been queasy about Trump's protectionism all along. And if anything, they're libertarians, which is something that the Republican Party has walked away from. So there's a sign of hope. Labor power, this is interesting because labor is interested in protectionism, and they were glad when Trump got rid of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And he was glad when they were glad when Trump strengthened the labor hoops that Mexico had to jump through in the newly negotiated form of NAFTA. Disrespect for intellectuals in the arts, I think we can all stipulate that that's been a problem. Obsession with crime and punishment, the way that Trump has exploited the violence in Black Lives Matter and the violence in Antifa, which has our son, who is a reporter, contends have been kind of co-opted by anarchists, and that Black Lives Matter has been co-opted by the far left. It's no longer Martin Luther King, although Martin Luther King, towards the end of his career, particularly in the light of the Vietnam War, certainly expressed doubt in capitalism. And rampant cronyism and corruption we've seen in the pardons, we've seen in the abuses of using government to promote Trump industries. And here's the big one. This has just become how bad this is in the last month, that you get 1/3 of the House of Representatives rejecting an election. If that doesn't get our attention, I don't know what will. So what were the lies? This is a big lie, that he won the election in a landslide. He started off with a medium-sized lie, that he was a wildly successful businessman. The fact that he's declared bankruptcy, is it 4 times? It didn't seem to matter. That Russia did not support him in 2016. The Mueller report, even though it didn't get rolled out and the Republicans successfully squashed it, I hope somebody at someday will take a second look, that if there was not absolute coordination, there certainly was communication. And this is the racist part of it, that Barack Obama was born in Kenya, and Trump was took that lie and wrote it to the White House. So this is the latest. And Hannah Arendt talks about the big lie, and talks about how it was used against the Jews. So this is coming back to the list, and I thought that I'd at this point throw it open for discussion.
If there isn't a question, there is something that I'd like to ask. The plague, it came from from Asia, but it was pretty mild, wasn't it, going through Russia?
Oh, well, if you go and you look back on the map, it loops up through Europe, and it kind of burns out even before Russia. It burns out before Poland. And in those days, it was Poland, Lithuania, Commonwealth, right? Or if it hadn't been formed yet, it was about ready to be formed. And it burned itself out, which explains why there were so many Jews in Poland and Lithuania. They were cast out of Europe. In Europe that suffered from the plague, they were blamed for the plague. And so they headed east, and they kept going until somebody said you could stay. And the king of Poland said, welcome, you can help us. Actually, why don't you help manage our nobility's estates. Our nobles are having a hard time managing their estates. They're not collecting their taxes efficiently. So you see, and we saw this at the museum in Warsaw, how this all fell together. Oh, wait a minute. These guys were the managers for the states of the Polish nobles.
Yeah.
So Eichel's right. The plague did burn out, and these connections in history that help explain things that happen centuries later, I don't know if they explain, but they certainly offer interesting speculation.
Well, I can see why it would burn out after China, because it was prevailing, and then it just probably infected everybody, or they developed immunity. But why didn't it flare up in Russia?
I don't think it got that far. And in Russia and Poland, remember at the time we're not urbanized. So what we've studied in medieval and middle ages in Europe was the formation of towns. And I don't think Poland and Russia had gone through that yet. So I think that was a factor. The pandemics get into towns; they'll burn out in agricultural areas.
Could the climate of Russia and Poland also affect it in that the rodents that were carrying the fleas that were carrying the plague might have been frozen to death periodically? I mean, it's along the lines of Diamond's argument about the closer to equator horizontal transmission, east-west, etc.
Yeah, good point. Good point. That could
That's
very
kind
well
of funny
be.
because that's what Trump said: warmer weather and it'll get better.
Well, a lot of things he said that are best forgotten.
Wait till summer. Just wait till summer.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Remember, it was going to be Easter.
Oh, was that it? Oh my! Another QAnon moment.
What's happened to Newt Gingrich? I mean, I know he's still around. What's
he still pops up on Fox News, and he's still spouting. He gets on, and even after the insurrection, the problem was the left wing exploiting the public relations disaster.
I'm with you on that, though. I will never forgive that man. I think he really set up a lot of this.
Yeah.
Well, and you couldn't trust him when he left. He abandoned his wife while she was suffering from cancer or something. I mean,
yeah, right.
He was such a piece of work.
And he was having an affair when he was accusing Clinton of having an affair.
Right. Right. Well, I liked what you were saying about the military and the corporations. I kind of agree. Who would have thunk? But that some of these corporations, I know. Let's keep our fingers crossed.
Well, who pointed that out to me? I've got to acknowledge Ramsey, because I was going on and on about this, and Ramsey pointed that out. So Ramsey's our guy. I'm trying to draw him into these sessions, but he's been building his own little cottage in the backyard. So
Yeah.
I'm going to have to wait till he and your sister are settled in.
Yeah, they're getting there. A lot of their furniture's in. They're almost there.
Really?
Yeah, it's looking really good.
Well, he's stewing over his history books. They have so much sentimental value, and he doesn't have enough room in that cottage.
That's been a conflict, because he wants to save everything, and there's not a lot of room.
Oh, did you turn the tape off, Johnny?
Oh, you think we're beyond?
Yeah,
before I turn the tape off, I'll ask Juan Jose for a comment.
I think he might have had to leave. I don't see him on the gallery.
I'm still here.
You're
I haven't
there.
left. Hello,
Oh,
everyone.
good.
How are things politically in Colombia now?
Mm, okay, it's rough. For the starters, our president and all the Congress are really dumb because we still haven't started the vaccination process. We haven't even bought vaccines.
I
I think we're the only country in America who have not started the process of vaccination. So it's going to take a while.
Why did he dissolve Congress? Juan Jose?
I think he's frozen.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording. There we go.